Good afternoon to you all. Welcome to this special show at the Lok Sabha television studios. And this is a show where we'll have the Union Finance Minister, Mr. Arun Jaitley, addressing some of the questions on the Union budget that he presented a couple of hours ago. And along with him will be Union Minister of State for Finance, Mr. Jayant Sinha. And in our studios today we have a special panel of interviewers. On my extreme right is Mr. Anil Padmanabhan, and I have got Deepshikha Shekhawat also to join us in asking questions on Hindi. Mr. Finance Minister, welcome to the studio. Mr. Sinha, welcome to the studio. To start off, a lot of people are asking this question, and so I will raise them here at the start. What is the central message of your budget? There are many positives in this budget, as commentators have pointed out. There's infrastructure investment outlay has gone up. Tax administration has been toned up. That's the promise that you have laid out. Subsidies are being reduced, and also even though your revenue assumptions are little moderate, you have improved tax to GDP ratio, even though very marginally. But then there are voices in the Twitter world. There are people saying, is it a middle class budget? Is it an Amartya Sen budget? And also critics are saying that you have deferred your fiscal consolidation plan, and at the same time announced an ambitious increase in central plan outlay in spite of a dismal record in the current year. Could you give us a broad overview of what your central vision in this budget was in the light of these comments?
First of all, when you compare the present year, this was the year where we inherited the economy. So we got onto a moving train, and the train was moving quite badly. You had to change the entire global attitude, investors' attitude towards India. You had to clear the backlog of decisions. You had to clean up the mess lying on the table. That's what we've done, and that brought positive results. Even though it was not an extraordinary year for the Indian economy, it was a modest year. We are likely to grow under the new series by 7.4%. I think from here, the time for takeoff comes. Now, I think there are two major factors which we must bear in mind. The first is that the entire architecture of the center-state financial relationship has been redefined. The states were getting 32% plus some extras. Now they get 42 plus 5, 47%. So every tax New Delhi collects, 47 goes to the states. So I have straight away down by 10%. If you look at the All India picture, and we calculated, total national taxes, center and state, the states used to get 49, center still had 51 till last year. This year it is 62 in favor of the states. So the Indian states are financially more powerful, and I think this is a great development. It's a great development because they are the ones who are going to spend the money on the ground. They are not to be seen just paying salaries and come rushing to Delhi, give me more funds for centrally sponsored schemes or otherwise. Now, how do I make up for the loss of revenue? The size of my cake has shortened. Therefore, next year we have to grow faster. If we go on the projected growth rate of 8% plus, our revenue projection is about 15 to 16%. Last year's projection was overstated because 4.1 was a fiscal target set not by me but by Mr. Chidambaram, which I had adopted. Halfway through the year I couldn't change it. And therefore, to reach 4.1, what is the amount required? There are only two ways you can meet the fiscal target. You either earn more or you spend less. Now, we did a little of both. But this year is my year. And therefore, I have to be transparent about every fact. Now, if my revenues go up by 15.9 or some, as we are projecting with this growth rate, I make up for the shortfall in terms of the size of the center's cake by tax buoyancy. The second important factor is the other investment destinations, barring the United States, are not doing particularly well. And all competing economies are under stress themselves. And therefore, the world can't drive on one engine. They'll need multiple engines. And everybody thinks it's India's chance to fly, if I may use the phrase from The Economist.
Honest.
And therefore, there's a positive sentiment about us. Now, what do we do in this positive sentiment? I can't suddenly increase expenditure this year. The one fact we have noticed it, despite a positive sentiment, a legitimate comment, on the ground is infrastructure moving. Look at the highways. The public-private partnership model is not working. We've inherited the highways back. Mr. Vajpayee left behind a sector which was going to boom, and we've got a very lethargic, underperforming sector. So everybody is agreeing that you have to put public investment. Now, we've created a new model of this investment, which I think is, besides federalism, the second big point. I increase central spend on infrastructure by 70,000 crores. This will have its impact. I am now going to allow railways, highways and irrigation projects to raise money through tax-free bonds. And three, we've earmarked separate funds. I have just announced a contribution. PSUs will also contribute. We start with a 20,000 crore. Government or state institutions will contribute. Your capacity to leverage private funds, including international funds, is going to be several times over. We recently had a conference last month in Delhi where most of the fund managers, the biggest ones in the world, came and said, let the government put in money, we'll put in our bit. And they can put in about 90% of it. Now, this will become a major instrument for funding infrastructure. This is the second big idea. The third big idea, when you say, is it the Amartya Sen approach? Well, frankly, even though I want the economies to grow, I can't be unconcerned about the poor people. Mm-hmm. And growing economies must also be concerned with social spending. So we have not compromised on the social sectors. We maintained the spending. Plus, we had an emphasis on social your programs, which are social security programs. Now, I would at best say, I don't want to overstate it, we've just started the idea. So between the middle classes and the weaker sections, there's a common thread.
Okay.
The middle classes entirely pay for themselves. Mm-hmm. So I have allowed them a 50,000 rupee annual deduction. Yes. Put your monies into the pension funds. So you pay less taxes. So by the time you are 60 years old, you'll have a huge corpus. And I'm told the NPS is giving a 11% return today. Right. So the money is going to multiply several times. So even independently, NPS is a safe and a great investment. This money in turn will be used, the more it's spent, the more it's used for a national cause, infrastructure and various other investments. As far as weaker sections are concerned, we've only giving a glimpse. You pay 1 rupee a month, you get an accident insurance of 2 lakhs. You pay less than a rupee a day, 70 paisa a day, you get a life insurance of 2 lakhs. And you pay a nominal amount of about 250 rupees a month during your earning life. You get a 5,000 pension, inherited by your spouse, inherited by children. Mm-hmm. Children will get the corpus. Yeah. Now, this is partly contributory, partly the government of India will give a budgetary support. I have said in the pension scheme we'll give an equal support for 5 years. And then I am also cleaning up the amounts which are unclaimed amounts lying in your EPF, PPF, which are the unclaimed amounts. And by legislation, they will be transferred for social sector programs for the aged people, senior citizens. Okay. That's the whole object.
Absolutely. So there are 3 big issues. Anil, would you like to take it further, especially on the fiscal devolution plan?
Yes, very clearly the shadow of the 14th Finance Commission is all over your budget. So like you rightly said, it is squeezed, the cake has diminished for you. But implicit in it, in what the 14th Finance Commission said and what you have said in your budget speech, seems to be some kind of a new development ideology for this country in terms of the resource sharing is now based on devolution, not on grants. There is a greater incentive in your budget to create entrepreneurs, to create people who can create their own jobs. So can you just elaborate a little bit on that?
You see, As far as devolution is concerned, I think discretions must end. And therefore, I will give to a particular state because it's a BJP state and somebody else is a Congress state, I won't give money to. I think this is a story of the past. Both by the Finance Commission and by my budget, the non-NDA states are greater beneficiaries. The IT sector, technology coming in, isn't it desirable to give them some customs rebate? Manufacturing sector, last year I corrected them, inverted duty structure, input costs will go up, therefore we've corrected that aberration. As far as the point which Mr. Bhattacharya made on the middle classes, well, I must say that there is an attempt by us even last year and this year, that these are salaried people who pay income tax. They are the ones who struggle their entire life to save a little money. Do I or do I not put more money in their pocket? It increases spending, compelling them to save. Last year I said I increased by 50,000 rupees the housing loan deduction. I increased 80C savings by 50,000 rupees. Now it was considered time, healthcare for instance. Now people must be, as a part of my social security program, people should be incentivized to buy health insurance premiums. Yeah. There must be health insurance policies, so that you can't have a society which in terms of illness, we know how much it costs now to get an unwell person treated. And small concessions like transportation. Now it's been 800 rupees since ages. Now anybody who uses a vehicle or even uses public transport today, uses the metro in Delhi, can't manage in 800. And therefore to earn, he's spending. So that must be allowed as an expenditure. Now 800 becoming 1600 is no extraordinary favor. It's just a brush with reality.
अरुण जी, मोदी सरकार के इस बजट से बहुत आशाएं थी, बहुत अपेक्षाएं थी हर तबके को, चाहे व्यवसायिक क्षेत्र को ले, आम आदमी को ले, किसानों को ले। ये बजट उन सारी अपेक्षाओं पर कितना खरा उतरता है?
देखिए, सरकार का जीवन कार्यकाल 5 वर्ष का होता है और आपको धीरे धीरे अर्थव्यवस्था को पूरा 5 साल में खड़ा करके एक चुनौती पे लाना है। पूरी अर्थव्यवस्था को देखो तो हम अर्थव्यवस्था को दुनिया की सबसे तेज गति से बढ़ने वाली अर्थव्यवस्था बना सकते हैं। 8% पे हम आगे बढ़ें और आगे हम 10% का सपना देखें, और अगर कहीं हम 10-15 साल इस गति से चलते रहे तो देश को गरीबी में से बाहर निकाल पाना संभव होगा। दूसरा, हमें गरीब की भी चिंता करनी थी, उसके लिए पैसा रखना था और राज्यों को भी पैसा देना था। अब ये बैलेंसिंग एक्ट था। हमें इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर भी बनाना था और फिस्कल डेफिसिट की भी चिंता करनी थी। अब ग्रोथ के बीच में और फिस्कल डेफिसिट के अनुशासन के बीच में एक कहीं ना कहीं तो मेल होना चाहिए। तो इसलिए मैं केवल 3% तक की यात्रा 2 साल में तय करूं और इस बार इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पे आधा खर्च कर दूं, तो उससे तो विकास रुक जाएगा देश का। तो मैंने वो बैलेंसिंग एक्ट किया। कोई बहुत आफत नहीं आने वाली है कि अगर ये 2 साल की बजाय मैं 3 साल में यात्रा पूरी कर लूं, हर साल मैं 50-50 हजार करोड़ एक्स्ट्रा इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में अगर डाल पाता हूं तो देश के हाईवेज, देश के पोर्ट्स, देश के इरिगेशन सिंचाई की योजनाएं, देश की रेलवेज, इन सबको लाभ मिलने वाला है। और इसलिए इन सब क्षेत्रों की हम लोगों ने चिंता की है। सो गरीब की, मध्यम वर्ग की और देश का उद्योग तेजी से बढ़े। इस देश में एक खोखली बहस है। मैं हमेशा कहता हूं कि आप गरीब के पक्ष में हो या उद्योग के पक्ष में हो। मैं तो दोनों के पक्ष में हूं। जब तक उद्योग से मैं कमाई नहीं करूंगा तो मैं गरीब की सेवा कहां से करूंगा। इसलिए मैं इसमें अंतर्विरोध नहीं मानता हूं, ये दोनों साथ चल सकते हैं।
आपने बजट भाषण की शुरुआत की थी एक कविता की पंक्तियों से, कुछ तो फूल खिलाए हैं और कुछ और फूल खिलाने हैं, मुश्किल ये है बाग में अब तक कांटे हैं पुराने। तो ये बजट उन कांटों को किस हद तक निकाल पाएगा? बहुत सारी परेशानियां थी उद्योग जगत की और विदेशी निवेशक भी थोड़ा आने में हिचकिचा रहे थे। क्या अब ये बजट के बाद
अगर
निवेश का जो चक्र है वो चालू हो पाएगा?
आप पिछले 9 महीने देखें, बिना कोई क्रांति लाए हुए जो देश की टैक्सेशन व्यवस्था थी, निवेशक उसको देखता था और इस देश से दूर भाग जाता था। अब उसको कैसे परिवर्तित करना है, जितने विवाद से धीरे धीरे उन विवादों को सुलाने का काम हम लोग कर रहे हैं, और 9 महीने में हमने किया भी है। कम से कम एक प्रेरणा बड़ी है कि इस देश की न्याय व्यवस्था निष्पक्ष है, इस देश की टैक्सेशन प्रणाली उतनी खराब नहीं जितनी हम सोचते थे, अभी भी बहुत सुधार करने की जरूरत है। दूसरा, इस देश में भ्रष्टाचार है। हमने कोल ऑक्शन से और 4 तारीख को जो स्पेक्ट्रम ऑक्शन होगी उससे ये साबित कर दिया कि सरकार ये अधिकार अपने पास नहीं चाहती। कोई हम पिक एंड चूज करें उसकी आवश्यकता नहीं है। तो मैंने 2 बार बजट भाषण में कहा कि मतलब द स्कैम रिजीम्स, करप्शन एंड स्कैम रिजीम्स आर अ थिंग ऑफ द पास्ट। अब हमने कहा हम कानून लाएंगे कि सारे कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स किस तरीके से इशू किए जाएंगे। उसमें भी हम अपने पास अधिकार नहीं रखना चाहते, बाजार तय करे एक क्लियर ट्रांसपेरेंट तरीके से। उन विवादों को हल कैसे करेंगे, उसमें फिर सरकार के मिनिस्टर और सरकारी अधिकारी उसमें चौधरी बन जाएं, उसका कोई आवश्यकता नहीं है। उसकी भी एक व्यवस्था उसके अंदर हम बनाएंगे। मैंने यहां तक कहा, मैं इस बजट का सबसे क्रांतिकारी सुझाव अगर एक आप मुझसे पूछे तो मैं मानता हूं, हम लोगों को निवेश के लिए बुलाते हैं, कहते हैं हमने एफडीआई बढ़ा दी, हमने रेड कारपेट ले डाउन कर दिया। वो जब इस देश में आता है या देश का कोई भीतर का निवेशक है, वो पूंजी लगाता है, फिर 5 साल उसको दफ्तर से दफ्तर भगाते हैं कि तुझे परमिशन कैसे मिलेगी। तो मैंने कहा मैं एक कमेटी बनाऊंगा, उसके आधार पे कानून बनेगा, रेगुलेटरी गाइडलाइंस होंगी, आप अपना काम शुरू कीजिए। अगर गाइडलाइन का उल्लंघन करोगे तो कानून आपको रोकेगा, अन्यथा आपको व्यवसाय करने का अधिकार है। मतलब कम से कम अगर इसमें हम सफल हो पाते हैं तो मैं इसको सबसे बड़ा सुधार उस दृष्टि से मानूंगा।
Mr. Minister, if I can come back to the 14th Finance Commission recommendations and how they impacted your budget, will it be correct to get that impression that this has influenced your taxation strategy a little bit? And let me illustrate how it may have influenced your taxation strategy, which is that you have abolished wealth tax, which was a shareable resource, but you have replaced it with a 2% extra surcharge, which we will not share. And if you take the figures, 1,000 crore in the wealth tax we are losing, 42% of that will be around 420 crore, which you would have to give to the states, whereas 9,000 crore of 2% surcharge will be entirely go to the center. Similarly, if you look at the oil, the petrol and diesel prices, where you are substituting the cess, substituting the increased duties that you had levied during the year with cess, which will again come to you. So taken together, 80,000 crore of annual extra revenue and 9,000 crore of surcharge. Is the taxation strategy getting impacted by the 14th Finance Commission?
I think on the first question of wealth tax, you may not be very accurate. Okay. Because what persuaded my thinking was, why must I have a high cost, low yield tax? Okay. Lakhs and lakhs of people are filing returns. They go and understate their jewelry from the jewelers. They go to the real estate people and understate the value of properties. Then they file a return. That returns are now, the whole energy of the department is spent in those lakhs of returns. And finally we end up getting 900 crores or 1,000 crores from the whole wealth tax, and with all its attendant consequences. So it's a very high cost tax and very low yield.
So why not raise the tax itself?
Therefore, rather than allow that to continue, at some stage after GST, a large number of cesses are going to be subsumed in the taxes. Let's be clear. After all, service tax, on service tax there was a cess which we've subsumed into the as a tax itself. So with GST, it'll only be a transient phase. Therefore, I decided that tax on super rich, who can afford to pay it, increase that surcharge by 2%, so that we don't want to favor the rich must pay a little more, and by sacrificing 1,000, saving so much of governmental energy, eliminating corruption and harassment, and I end up collecting 9,000 instead of 1,000.
But states lose out completely.
No, states have gained so much and the idea behind this was not states losing out. When you talk of petrol, there may be partly a point in what you say. My idea was not to make the states suffer, and we realized it when we were raising this. When oil prices come down, how is that money to be shared? 11 times we pass the benefit to the consumer. On one or two occasions, the oil companies have retained the benefit, and they've retained it because they are suffering from inventory losses. You see, they buy at $80 and they are now selling at 60. So 30,000 crores was the inventory losses of the oil companies. After all, these are public companies. They can't be made to suffer. The third area is the money coming into the central revenue, either by excise or by tax. Now, manufacturing revenues were low, and therefore we needed to supplement our resources. We have to run a government. But this money, we now intend, a large part of it must go into highways. It's a part of my priority on infrastructure. A little bit goes into railways. So Mr. Suresh Prabhu has shown that he means business. He's not gone in for more trains. He says, let me first put my house in order. His operating ratio has come down to 88. I hope next time it comes down to 85 or 86. So he has more money for development of the railways rather than just meeting its own expenditure. And this money of the cess will go to substantially highways and partly railways.
Okay.
Now, who owns the highways or the railways? The center or the states? Is the people of India. These are trust organizations for the people of India. So if they are to be built out of my budget, nobody should grudge if I am spending money on highways and railways. I am not spending this money on paying salary to my employees.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Anil, you have Mr. Sinha. Do you have a question for Mr. Sinha?
Yes, actually, I'm curious about the fiscal math underlying the budget. It talks about disinvestment in a big way, particularly strategic disinvestment. And in your FRBM note, it says you're looking at even Suti. So is that true? I mean, you're going to look to divest from
very moderate assumptions. We are thinking that the GDP growth rate is going to be between 8.1 to 8.5%, somewhere in that range. And then, of course, we have to look at nominal GDP when we look at tax collection. So overall, our sense on tax collection, because we think nominal GDP is going to be about 11 to 12%, our overall tax collection number is 14%. Assuming a very slight buoyancy because growth is going to pick up, plus of course we have excise taxes that we have with petrol as well. And as a result of that, we think that the revenue collection number 14% is quite reasonable. Now, in addition to that, there are non-tax receipts as well. And in the non-tax receipts, there are various categories like dividends from public sector enterprises and so on. But disinvestment indeed is also a major component of that. And our estimation based on the excellent results this year has been that we could get somewhere between, let's say, 65,000 crores on the disinvestment side. So when you add all of that up, I think the fiscal arithmetic adds up quite cleanly and nicely.
Yeah, actually, just taking it a little further, the strategic disinvestment which you talk of, so you specifically mentioned Suti. So this is something which has been discussed by several finance ministers in the past. So are you signaling that you are actually looking to divest? These are UTI holdings, the former UTI holdings. So are you looking to divest?
We have a number of different assets. Suti is certainly one of those assets. There are many other assets as well. Companies that are not listed right now that could be listed. We have companies that are already partially listed that could be disinvested further. This is a decision for the cabinet to take exactly which assets and which sequence and when to do this. Of course, we'll have more time to plan all this out this year because we have the full year to do it.
But in principle, it's on the table.
In principle, anything sensible is always on the table for the government.
Okay.
अरुण जी, मैं भट्टाचार्य जी की उस बात पे दोबारा जाना चाहूंगी कि मिडिल क्लास बजट है, लेकिन मिडिल क्लास की बजट से सबसे बड़ी उम्मीद होती है करों में थोड़ी राहत, थोड़ी छूट. आपने ऐसा नहीं किया है, इसके पीछे क्या कारण था?
देखिए, इस प्रश्न का पहले आप देखिए, इस देश के लोगों में आज 3.5 पौने 4 करोड़ लोग इस देश में टैक्स देते हैं, इनकम टैक्स. और देश की जनसंख्या की तुलना में लगभग 3-4% लोग टैक्स दे रहे हैं. किसी भी देश की टैक्सेशन प्रणाली में इनकम टैक्स देने वालों की संख्या बढ़नी चाहिए. ये एक चुनौती है, वो घटनी नहीं चाहिए. और इसलिए इस परिभाषा को हम लोग सोचते हैं कि आप केवल स्लैब को बढ़ा दो. स्लैब कभी बढ़ सकते हैं, मैं उसको रूल आउट नहीं करूंगा, लेकिन सरकार के पास फिस्कल स्पेस कितनी है ये भी मुझे ढूंढनी पड़ेगी. और राज्यों को इतने पैसे देने के बाद मेरी जो फिस्कल स्पेस थी बहुत छोटी हो चुकी थी. लेकिन मैंने स्लैब्स न बढ़ाकर लोगों को मजबूर करने की कोशिश की कि वो बचत करें। जो इस देश की बचत 36% होनी चाहिए वो 29-30% पे आ गई। मुझे उसको वापस 35-36% पे ले जाना है। तो मैं लोगों को एक इंसेंटिव दे रहा हूं कि वो बचत करें। दूसरा, वो बचत करें अपने भविष्य के लिए करें। तीसरा, उनकी बचत से इस देश का निर्माण होगा, क्योंकि ये सारा पैसा देश के निर्माण में लगेगा। तो इसलिए केवल मैं उनको छूट दे दूं कि जाइए और खर्च करिए और इसको कंजम्पशन सोसाइटी बना दूं। कंजम्पशन सोसाइटी की तुलना में बचत करना, भविष्य के लिए बचत करना और देश के निर्माण के लिए बचत करना, ये मुझे बेहतर ऑप्शन लगी। मैं एक केवल उदाहरण के तौर पर आपको बता दूं, मैंने एक टोटल लगाया है। पिछले साल मैंने 3 तरह की रियायतें दी थी, इस बार भी 3-4 तरह की रियायतें दी हैं। ये दोनों वर्षों की मिला लो तो जो डिडक्शंस हैं या एग्जेम्पशंस हैं वो 2 लाख करोड़ के करीब, 2 लाख रुपए की पड़ती है एक व्यक्ति को। पुरानी वाली इसके साथ जोड़ ली जाए तो आज कोई भी टैक्स पेयर चाहे इन सब का लाभ उठाए। तो मैंने अपने भाषण में एक चार्ट भी दिया है साथ में, 4,44,200 करोड़ 200 रुपए, यानी लगभग 4.5 लाख रुपए की डिडक्शन एक व्यक्ति ले सकता है। तो इसलिए 7 लाख 8 लाख कमाने वाला अगर चाहे कि मैं टैक्स ना दूं तो प्लानिंग आदर्श स्थिति में कर सकता है। अब उसके पास इतना पैसा बचेगा बचत के लिए कि नहीं, एक दूसरा प्रश्न है। और ये सारा पैसा उसकी अपनी सेविंग्स होंगी, उसके अपने भविष्य के लिए होंगी और देश का निर्माण भी इससे हो जाएगा और मेरा सेविंग्स रेट भी बढ़ जाएगा।
घरेलू बचत बढ़ाने के लिए आपने ये योजनाएं आप ये लाए हैं। सोना जो है हमारा, अधिकांशतः हमारी जो बचत है वो सोना खरीदने में जाती है। आपने एक नई योजना निकाली है, इस बजट में बताई है। ये किस तरह से सोना खरीदने की जो आदत है इसको किस तरह से बदल सकती है और हमारा आयात किस तरह से कम कर सकती है?
वेल्थ टैक्स जब था, अगर उसके पक्ष में मुझे बोलना हो तो ये नॉन प्रोडक्टिव एसेट्स कम से कम उभर कर सामने आते थे, हालांकि लोग उसको अंडर एस्टिमेट करते थे। लेकिन एक लगाव है सोने से इस देश का और अपनी बचत है तो सोने में लगा दी जाए। अब सोने का विकल्प भी उनको दिया है और सोना है तो आप क्या करेंगे, इसमें 3 सुझाव मैंने दिए हैं। पहला ये कि जो सोना है और इसमें ज्वेलरी आइटम नहीं होंगे, जिनके पास रॉ गोल्ड है, आप जाकर उसको मोनेटाइज कर सकते हैं, बैंक में रख सकते हैं और आपको नॉमिनल ब्याज भी उसका बैंक से मिल जाएगा। दूसरा ये, आप सोना मत खरीदिए, सोने की कीमत का गोल्ड बॉन्ड खरीद लीजिए जो लोग सेविंग्स में डालते हैं, और जो बाजार में सोने का दाम बढ़ेगा उस बॉन्ड के ऊपर उतनी आपको प्रॉफिट होगी। और तीसरा, इस देश में जिसको हम गिनीज कहते हैं, गोल्ड कॉइन्स विदेश में बने हुए हमारे देश में चलते हैं, त्योहार पे दिए जाते हैं, लोग गिफ्ट करते हैं, लोग घरों में अपनी सेविंग्स उसमें रखते हैं। तो क्यों ना हम अपना जो सोना देश में इतना आया हुआ है उसको गोल्ड कॉइन जिसपे अशोक चक्र हो, भारत सरकार का औपचारिक हो, और ये सारे के सारे जो आते हैं ये स्मगलिंग या बिना ड्यूटी दिए हुए अधिकतर इसमें से आते हैं। तो इसमें इसको लेजिटिमाइज क्यों ना किया जाए। हमारा अनुभव पिछली सरकार से भिन्न है। पिछली सरकार ने मई के महीने में, ठीक उन्हीं दिनों जब चुनाव के परिणाम आ रहे थे और नई सरकार बदली जा रही थी, तो उन्होंने एक नई योजना लाए कि इस देश में सोना आएगा, उसको कुछ एक्सपोर्ट हाउसेस लेकर आएंगे, कुछ 6 लोगों के नाम दे दिए। इस देश में भयंकर मात्रा में सोना आना शुरू हो गया, लोग लाते गए, उसको होर्डिंग कर रहे थे। नवंबर के महीने में हमने उसको वापस कर दिया और कहा जिसको सोना चाहिए ले आए, और 10% पे सोना गिर गया और दाम कम हो गए, क्योंकि जिन्होंने होर्डिंग की हुई थी उनको अब बाजार में बेचना पड़ा। तो सोने को अगर हम औपचारिक रूप से रोकते हैं तो फिर वो अनौपचारिक रूप से आता है। ये एक बीमारी है इस देश में। तो इसलिए सोने को आप मोनेटाइज करें, गोल्ड बॉन्ड्स लाएं। आप एक देखिए, हम अर्बन हाउसिंग की बात करते हैं, एक अर्थशास्त्री ने उस दिन सुझाव दिया कि आप रूरल हाउसिंग की सोचिए, और वो बेचारों के पास क्या है बैंक से पैसा लेने के लिए, वो अपना सोना रख के बैंक से पैसा ले सकते हैं। थोड़ा बहुत हर घर में होता है, गांव में भी होता है कई बार। और इसलिए मुझे लगता है ये एक अनप्रोडक्टिव एसेट को प्रोडक्टिव एसेट बनाना, ये योजना हमने बजट के अंदर लाने की कोशिश की है।
Mr. Jaitley, if you turn to your announcements with regard to the corporate sector, you have made a big announcement or a promise that you will reduce their corporation tax rate from 30% to 25% over a period of 4 years. And you also hinted at there will be pruning down of the exemptions. Is there a timeline on how you go about it? Because it will create a lot of doubts in their corporate sector's mind how the exemptions will be tackled. If you can give us some idea on that.
I'll tell you. You see, ideally, I would have loved to do it this year. This was added to my seriousness that I've been in business. Now, why do I want to bring corporate tax from 30 to 25? I have to attract investment in this country. Not only international, even domestic. Now, we have 30% plus surcharges and cess, etc. Look at all the ASEAN countries. They average 21.9. Our competing economies are almost 10% cheaper than us when it comes to the cost of tax. So investors will ask, why should I invest in India when I can get a cheaper facility elsewhere? So on competition I lose out. My own investors are setting up units in other ASEAN countries because they are lower rates of tax. So I need investment to create jobs and to remove poverty. So I lose on 2 counts. First, my image is of a high taxing country. Second, on account of these exemptions, what is actually 30%,
that's true. Yeah.
I end up getting only 23% or less. So in an ideal tax structure, you bring the rates down, make them globally competitive, but along with bringing it down, you phase out the exemptions. Now, I don't want to go back on the promise of what exemptions are there. There are some exemptions which have a sunset date.
Yeah.
Those which don't have a sunset date, we can phase them out easily. But I didn't do it this year because I didn't want to take everybody by surprise on one day saying it's going.
But will the exercise of phasing them out happen during the year?
But we will have to start a program for phasing out. And phasing out, since I've kept a 4-year timetable, the phasing out can be in consonance with the reduction also.
Okay.
So I don't want to profiteer out of this. I want to make India's tax globally competitive, because to attract investment, and at the same time phase out the exemptions which can be phased out. If still something has to remain for a larger national interest, that's a different matter. The other advantage of this is going to be the taxman discretion will end. Your tax return will be very simple. And the third advantage is bulk of the litigation of tax is on exemptions. And I think that litigation comes to an end. So we'll have a neater, cleaner, smarter tax system in the country.
Anil, you have
a quick question on the black money part, which is a key part of your budget. So one, I wanted to understand the logic in the context of that you already have a Money Laundering Act and you have a FEMA. So why would you need to come up with a special act to tackle black money? And second follow-up question to that is, how do you prevent this from a kind of misuse in terms of as a victimization of corporates or individuals or whatever?
You see, first of all, these amendments that the new law that I have announced, it's a law specific on foreign assets. You are an Indian citizen, you keep money in a foreign bank illegally, or you keep an asset outside the country illegally, it only applies to that case. It doesn't apply to either legitimate cases. It's also not a law which applies to domestic black money. We have other laws for domestic black money. Now, for the purposes of Money Laundering Act, the violation of Income Tax Act is not a predicate offence. So if I say that to have a bank account abroad or an asset abroad illegally, it's not a predicate offence. So I needed to put pressure on people as a disincentive. When the law comes out, you will notice that there will be a window under which you make a clean breast, because everybody has to make a disclosure now. Pay the taxes, we'll be charging you penalty, the percentages will all come out, and thereafter you put an end to your sins. After that window closes, the prosecution chapter begins. Then if we catch anybody with monies abroad, then he's going to be prosecuted. It won't be a compoundable offence. There'll be a deterrent punishment. And I think the manner in which, you see, today disclosures are taking place by default. Somebody steals a document and leaks it out. And in each disclosure by default, you see an Indian present somewhere or the other. Which means this is not a hallucination, it's a hard reality. And this reality has to be changed.
How do you prevent misuse? You know, like, because it's a very draconian provisions. They are very...
Every law can be misused. The Indian Penal Code can also be misused by a thanedar in a police station. That doesn't mean you repeal it. You see, if there is a menace, you'll have to have a strict penalty. Now, if you see the kind of the large number of people being mentioned in all these lists which have been unofficially circulating, it's extremely disturbing. Yeah. Particularly when we are, on one hand, we are easing business in India, we are making taxation reasonable, we are making it, doing everything bending backwards to make sure that people spend their money in India. If still you choose to have it, we are even allowing you to officially carry foreign exchange outside the country and buy a property. Officially you are allowed, but if you want to do it illegally, then you must be prepared for the consequences.
Okay. आपने कहा कि एक ऐसी योजना लेकर आएंगे जिसमें एक टैक्स एमनेस्टी जिसमें लोग
मैंने एमनेस्टी शब्द नहीं कहा.
आपने एमनेस्टी शब्द इस्तेमाल नहीं किया, पर इस तरह की ये जो योजना है इसका प्रारूप क्या होगा?
कानून जब सामने आएगा उसमें स्वाभाविक होगा कि हमारा उद्देश्य ये है कि सारा पैसा वापस आए जो आज बचा हुआ है, क्योंकि जो अकाउंट जिनकी डिटेल्स आई हैं वो तो 2006 की डिटेल थी, तो 2014 तक तो किसी ने प्रतीक्षा नहीं की, सारा पैसा निकल गया था उसमें से. तो इसलिए उसमें हम क्या विंडो देते हैं नहीं देते, ये सारा उसके अंदर स्पष्ट होकर सामने आएगा. वो डिटेल्स उस कानून में होंगी.
और बेनामी कानून की आपने उसे दोबारा लाने की बात की. ये कानून पहले संसद पास कर चुकी है, लेकिन अभी तक वो नोटिफाई नहीं हुआ, लागू नहीं किया गया.
देखिए, वो ऑब्सोलीट लॉ है और पिछले वो 1980 के दशक में बना और अगले 25-30 साल तक नोटिफाई ही नहीं हुआ. इसलिए दैट्स अ रस्टेड पीस ऑफ लेजिस्लेशन, उसको जंग लग चुका है, वो अब चल नहीं पाएगा. और इसलिए बेनामी ट्रांजैक्शंस जो आप करते हैं, किसी फर्जी नाम से संपत्ति ले लेना, उसको चेक करने के लिए कि देन यू लूज द एसेट, आपको कानून विशेष लाना पड़ेगा.
I have a question for Mr. Sinha. The finance minister talked about how the direct taxes code is a now thing of the past. So it's a goodbye to direct taxes code. And at the same time, the minister also announced about how GAR is being postponed by 2 years. Now, both these things have actually raised many questions in the sense that what kind of direct taxes regime would it be? Will GAR be postponed yet again? What kind of tax administration mechanism will be in place? So, can you throw some fresh light on this?
No, I'll throw some light, and you know, Honorable Finance Minister, I'm sure will have some views on it as well. With respect to the direct tax code, you know, that has been discussed for many years. It was in committee for a number of years as well, and there were a lot of changes that were brought about and suggested even then. But essentially, what has happened is that because there have been a number of those amendments and those modifications made to the tax code as it exists right now, many of the salient and best features of the direct tax code are actually reflected in the tax code right now. And in addition to that, what has happened is that the tax code itself is quite well settled with the case law. And so many of the more contentious, more complicated issues have now been worked out through either rulings or through the judicial process and so on. So it's actually quite a well settled body of code now, which you wouldn't want to once again disturb by bringing in a direct tax code. So I say leaving it as it is right now, I think makes a lot of sense, particularly with respect to the corporate tax regime that we are bringing in place, which will make things even simpler and so on. So I think we should set that aside and leave it as it is right now. Your second question regarding GAR. GAR is an anti-avoidance measure. It is to ensure that people are not using loopholes to avoid tax. And there are a number of interpretations and challenges there in terms of how to implement it, which can also be quite disruptive. So as of now, the best way to consider is to actually park it, set it aside for a couple of years, and then come back to it and see whether it is still you know, meeting the purposes that it was designed to do, which is to actually...
But is there an interim measure that you contemplate?
No, we've deferred it right now. Let's study it and see whether it will in fact serve the purpose that it's intended to do.
You see, as far as the direct tax code is concerned, it had some very good points. A lot of them, point by point, have been incorporated in various budgets. In fact, today, this whole corporate tax idea of mine is an idea which is partly there in the direct tax code itself. So I won't say it was a bad document, it was a good document. And a number of suggestions of that document have been incorporated. Therefore, the document as a whole now loses its relevance. It will have to be re-examined. As far as GAR is concerned, it makes one substantial change in the principles or the rules of taxation. Originally in the taxation rule, evasion was prohibited, avoidance was allowed.
Okay.
Now countries all over the world, developed countries, are now obliterating the line of distinction between evasion and avoidance. So avoidance is as bad as evasion. When those countries have taken it, the international investors have accepted it. Now in India there is a vulnerability. And the vulnerability is at a time when we are wanting to take off. And we think it's our chance now to move ahead. We can't risk investment flowing out. It will have an impact on the rupee-dollar parity. It will have its impact on the monies available on the markets and so on. So we have to be a little more cautious. Secondly, it raises larger issues, particularly because it impacts upon international investment when it gets into India. I can only tell you what one of the wiser people told me. A man sitting in Los Angeles wants to invest in India. He has to come back via Mauritius, so I give him the relief.
Okay.
But if he wants to fly in directly, I won't give him the relief. So I think there's a lot of, as we proceed further on our fiscal thinking, we'll have to take into, consider all these facts.
Okay.
And therefore, rather than a knee-jerk reaction, I think it's time to pause, think, and therefore we needed time. We have put in abeyance. It's not saying that I find something highly objectionable in GAR. There are countries, developed countries in the world which have accepted these principles. So there is some substance in what the principles are.
Okay. I think we have run out of time. One question only. Anil, go ahead.
Okay. See, I mean, I just wanted to ask a political question at the end of it all. That the two states that have been picked out for special assistance are West Bengal and Bihar. Both are coincidentally poll-bound states. So, I mean...
Can I give you another reason besides the poll-bound? Hasn't the Prime Minister repeatedly said that the eastern part of the country has to grow faster because they are the ones who need the advantage? We've had a policy that the coal auction money, and hopefully in other case of other minerals to some extent, will go to the states which produce them. So Jharkhand is going to benefit substantially. Orissa is going to benefit substantially. Bihar is landlocked. Bihar is also not mineral rich. It's agriculture rich, but it's not mineral rich. West Bengal has some mineral, but from an industrialized state, industry has gone down. Less than 5% of the total state GDP is industry. The kind of mineral in Jharkhand and Odisha is attracting investment. In Bengal, it's relatively slower. Therefore, these are the two states which need certain incentives. And what are the incentives which we have given to Andhra Pradesh? A 15% investment allowance and a 15% additional depreciation. The same principle will apply if any investment wants to come into Bihar. Now that the FFC has said that no special category status, we have to bring these states up.
I think we have unfortunately run out of time, and we had many more questions, Mr. Minister. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, Mr. Jaitley, Mr. Sinha, for coming to the studios of Lok Sabha television, and wish you all the best. And we come to the end of this session, where the Finance Minister and his deputy, Mr. Sinha, came and addressed our many questions. And hopefully it answered some of the questions that our viewers may have come up with while listening to the Finance Minister's budget speech. Thank you.